Alright, I've been wanting to make this video for the last 2 days, but more and more Pokemon news kept on getting in the way. However, we finally have some breathing room, so we can talk about the competitive changes coming to Pokemon Sword and Shield from the Game Informer exclusive coverage. So if you're hyped for Pokemon Sword and Shield, don't forget to leave a like on the video, share with your friends, and comment down below how you feel about these competitive changes. Let's get into it. Pokemon Sword and Shield have mechanics to let you use your favorite Pokemon competitively. Now, that already sounds like something we have with Hyper Training, but this is going to make competitive more accessible and also bring more tools for getting competitive Pokemon. The latest entries in the Pokemon series are making several tweaks to the franchise's long-running conventions, from introducing autosave to getting rid of the EXP share item in favor of an automatic solution. So the thing is, EXP share isn't being gotten rid of, it's actually the option to toggle it off. So much like in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, you're just going to have EXP share permanently, and that was also extra confirmed in the 101 rapid fire questions for Pokemon Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield changed several things about the standard play of a Pokemon game. While Game Freak was open about a lot of the behind-the-scenes information surrounding the development of Pokemon Sword and Shield, the team was a bit cagier about a new battle mechanic it could only tease. Traditionally in the series, you start with your starter Pokemon, and then you catch a lot of Pokemon in the beginning, and those are with you throughout your whole adventure, and the player gets attached to them. But a lot of times, they get into the competitive battles, and they find that they can't actually use those Pokemon, or they're not competitive. So they have to go out, find the exact right Pokemon, or breed them in a certain way to make sure they are viable in competitive battles. Director Iwao says, "This time around, we really wanted to introduce some systems that help the player take those Pokemon they've caught in the beginning and the first one that they choose and have them go straight into competitive battles. There's a lot of hidden parameters to Pokemon that aren't surfaced to the player. We're doing a lot of stuff in the back end, introducing systems that allow players to make sure that the Pokemon they want to use in competitive battles are viable." Now, this is also something interesting when you take information from the 101 rapid fire interview, because Iwao is like the most competitive person at Game Freak along with Morimoto, and Morimoto is the battle planning lead at Game Freak. So it says a lot when you have one of the most competitive people at a company saying that this is how they want to change competitive battling, or at least the accessibility for competitive Pokemon. Also from the rapid fire interview, there was a question about like how they feel about more people wanting to get into competitive Pokemon, and Junichi Masuda is happy that people want to play, so it looks like they're going to be expanding that as well. And also another strike against Bring Back National Dex is that, you know, players get attached to the Pokemon that they have for their adventure. So Game Freak acknowledges and recognizes the emotional connections that players make with their Pokemon, and they want to make it to where people can keep that connection and then even take it into competitive battling. So they aren't being cold about this decision to cut the National Dex. It's just something that had to happen to make better Pokemon games. That's just a fact at this point. When I ask Iwao for more details, he says he can't explain the system further, but does go on to tease a bit more. "I've got to be very vague about it, but one example, it will be visible to the player and they'll know when they see it. I think, say you have a Pokemon where it got all the right stats and everything, but there's a personality parameter as well that comes into play in battles. It might not be the right personality, so you'll breed until you get the right one, is what people do currently, but you'll see there's a system in the game that will fix that for people. While it's no longer necessary to do so, Iwao says players can still put effort into breeding to come up with the perfect specimen for competitive play. We do think there's value in that effort that players put into it, but at the same time, I think with Sword and Shield, we also want to have a system that makes it a bit more accessible. For example, if you're bringing Pokemon over from previous game into these games, being able to use that specific Pokemon that has sentimental value to you in the battle system competitively is something we wanted to try this time. So yeah, as we can see, more and more care for the sentiment that people have with their Pokemon, and Pokemon aren't just being completely struck from the Nintendo Switch, that even if a Pokemon is cut in the Galleon region, it's also going to be made available in future Pokemon games on the Nintendo Switch, so all Pokemon will be playable, and even when it comes to National Dex and Pokemon Sword and Shield, there's Pokemon Home, so all Pokemon will have functionality as well. But let's go back a bit and see what Iwao is talking about right here, because this is crazy. he has to be very vague about this new training system, and only a small little detail about it has to do with a Pokemon's personality. Now, the first thing I want to do is look up natures. That are natures called personalities in Japanese, and therefore we have a direct one-to-one relationship right here. No, in Japanese it's still considered a nature. Well, I also wanted to double check on characteristic to make sure that characteristic isn't called personality and then we're getting everything conflated and this is actually like a new hyper training system, but no, it's called individuality. And since breeding is still going to be viable but not necessary, and he talks about being able to take any Pokemon that we've had, we do think there's value and effort that players put into breeding, but at the same time, I think with Sword and Shield, we want to have a system that makes it more accessible, bringing Pokemon over from a previous game, and being able to use that specific Pokemon that has sentimental value is going to be something that we wanted to try. So it's going to be about taking any starter, taking any Pokemon from your adventure, taking any Pokemon from your previous adventures, and making them competitive based on their personality. So there's actually going to be a way of changing a Pokemon's nature inside the game. Now, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee had the best system up until this point, because you just tell the lady, hey, I'm going to be going for timid Pokemon today. She goes and casts a spell on you, and then all the Pokemon are going to appear timid, and it is kind of fair because there is money involved. So I hope that the system isn't super free. I still feel like you have to put work into training your Pokemon, or else you're pretty much like one step removed from hacking. If it's just you press a button, you get to set all the parameters for your Pokemon that has existed or that you got like your starter in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and then just spits it out competitively. I would prefer that some work actually went into it, especially with all of the, last decade, with Pokemon really starting to get competitive back in Generation 4, that they've, instead of implementing the system in X and Y, Pokemon Sun and Moon, they've actually made it to where you had to put in work for it, and they've made it easier and easier. I don't think that competitive Pokemon should be a complete handout, unless it's in like a Pokemon Battle Revolution battle simulator, but using this, if it's like way too easy, way too free, then I feel like it's going to water down the experience of a main series Pokemon game. But on the other hand, hacking is the biggest problem that is destroying Pokemon right now, and there's a lot of idiots out there that don't think it's cheating in any way, so being able to reduce the objective advantage that hackers and cheaters have is also going to be a good thing and will preserve the longevity of competitive in Pokemon Sword and Shield, hopefully. And since the biggest reason for the National Dex cut is competitive balance, and Game Freak is taking many more steps to make Pokemon Sword and Shield competitively accessible as well as competitively appealing, then that could work out. There was an entire trailer dedicated to just competitive Pokemon information that looked really good and really compelling, as well as the Battle Stadium, which is every Pokemon Master's dream come true. That we have ranked battles, we have a coherent ranking system, there's going to be like an ELO or rank preservation. You also receive rewards for battling competitively, so if you spend hours and hours on the battle spot, you're not like wasting any time, you're at least receiving money and items that further help getting competitive Pokemon. So I really like that. I really like that it is going to be more rewarding for competitive, but I also don't like if Game Freak is going to be heavily giving in to a lot of the entitlement that we see in the Pokemon community and just society in general these days. And I feel like the changes that happened in Pokemon X and Y and Pokemon Sword and Shield have made breeding easier than ever, to the point where there's almost no excuse to not actually get your Pokemon legitimately. However, the entitlement has spiked in the Pokemon community so hard that even though breeding is easier and more accessible, people are hacking more and more. So this is kind of seeming like a reaction to that, but the games are unfortunately most likely going to be hacked anyways, and probably before Pokemon Ultra, or not Pokemon Ultra, before Pokemon Home and Pokemon Bank becomes available for it. So we're going to see how this works, but I hope there actually has to be like some amount of serious work or resources or something put into it. And there's still a lot of other features that seem like would be really cool for how they incorporate competitive Pokemon, because we have Curry, that we have the big Pokemon Sword and Shield leak, and it says that it can raise stats and friendliness, and then we also see with like the Wobbuffet class Curry, restores half of your Pokemon's hit points, they also get experience points, and they become more friendly, so that's really cool. But is this system also going to kind of be invalidated depending on how getting the competitive Pokemon works? Or maybe this is just kind of like a step that kind of changes breeding functionality. So I feel like breeding is still going to be doable. We do think that there's value in the effort that players put into it. So the biggest thing about breeding is going to get egg moves. that unless there's like a full move tutor that teaches legacy moves, egg moves, and all kinds of crazy stuff like that, breeding will still have value inside of Pokemon Sword and Shield. I'd really like to see some of that effort preserved, and it sounds like it's going to be going in that direction. So you can have a competitively viable Pokemon by being able to hyper train it to get its IVs maxed out, by also being able to change its nature, and then more accessible EV training. So that makes a lot of sense, but it won't be like the peak, top, perfect competitive Pokemon if it doesn't have access to its full moveset and maybe a few other things that will only be doable through breeding, such as individual IV breeding for getting like hidden power and stuff like that. So at least it seems like people are still going to have to put work into getting their competitive Pokemon. Like if this training system actually requires like an hour or a few hours of effort to turn just any Pokemon into a competitive Pokemon, that would be really fair. That would be really nice. And also, it is just a piece of the puzzle, that even if you've bred the perfect Pokemon, has all the right moves, the right nature, I'm also wondering what they're going to be doing with abilities. That, you know, if it's a hidden ability, are you able to swap those out? Because we do have the ability capsule, but if you want a hidden ability and you don't have that, then you're kind of screwed. So we're going to see like what other features and like what other things can just modify your Pokemon, but that is only a piece of the puzzle, because after you get that, you have to level it to get it to a competitive level, and then you also have to EV train it. So as long as the EV training is still like going to take some effort, that makes it to where you have to put work into it. I wonder like what the trade-off is going to be. Now this makes me really wonder how EV training is going to work in Pokemon Sword and Shield. That is Curry going to be the best way of raising a Pokemon's EVs, or is it going to kind of be a way to augment and supplement that training? Is there going to be catch combos, like kind of how we saw with SOS battles, that when a Pokemon calls for another Pokemon, it enhances the EVs that you get for that Pokemon? And also kind of like in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, Let's Go didn't have EVs, but they had AVs, the Awaken values, which were obtained through candy, but if you got a high catch combo, you were receiving more candy for a Pokemon, so technically more EVs. So if you faint the same Pokemon multiple times in a row, is that going to be how expedited EV training works? Are hordes or some kind of system replacement for that going to come into play? There's a lot of questions, so I mean, at least it's not going to be like super free. And it kind of seems like this new system is going to be similar to not Hyper Training, but similar to Super Training. But the thing is, Super Training was just bad for EV training. Like, it was slower than Horde battling in every way, and it didn't really give you too much benefit otherwise, but it did let you count your EVs, so it made it a bit more transparent, and that seems like what they're going for here. This time around, we really wanted to introduce some systems that help the player be able to take those Pokemon they caught in the beginning, and the first one they choose, and actually take them straight into competitive battle. There's a lot of hidden parameters that aren't surfaced to the player. So just kind of more like having a training hub, where it just kind of shows you, here's the current state of this Pokemon for competitive, and then maybe being even more transparent about its potential, the EVs it has, its IVs, and then other things you can do to make it in a desirable place. But this is what worries me the most. Actually take them straight into a competitive battle. That sounds like it's also going to include EVs, and it sounds like a very expedited process to where you just go straight into competitive battling. It's so weird because, you know, Pokemon has been much more transparent and also a lot accessible when making competitive Pokemon. You look back at Generation 7, you have the judge just straight up tells you which of your stats are maxed out, and there's also a gauge which kind of gives you an approximation as to the IVs. While not as 100% transparent as telling you the exact number, that's more than good enough, and it's more than players have had pretty much ever, except when you talk to Judge, you have to scroll through and you have to find out that all of its stats are outstanding and maxed out and can't be any better or anything like that. So it's a lot quicker that way. EV training has also been made a lot faster, a lot more transparent. So it's not like back in Generation 4, Generation 5, where you had to look up a convoluted breeding guide or figure out these inefficient methods for EV training to get a competitive Pokemon. Competitive Pokemon has been very easy since Generation 6, and now that it feels like they're just making it easier, which to me is almost nonsense. Even like looking at Pokemon Let's Go, Pokemon Let's Go has the right amount of work reward, I feel, for getting a Pokemon competitive ready, because you still have to build up that chain. That can take a bit of time. You still have to move tutor it, and then you also have to get the nature and stuff. So if we just kind of add in breeding for egg moves, abilities, items, that little bit of extra time for a more serious game like Pokemon Sword and Shield, that feels very fair. Like, Pokemon Let's Go was rewarding your gameplay. I want my gameplay to be rewarded in a way that ends up with competitive Pokemon. I just don't want to get straight up competitive Pokemon in a system super easily. Then that really devalues the work that people have put in for the last decade, and also I think it just really panders to the handout entitlement culture instead of actually making people earn becoming a Pokemon master. So we're going to see how it goes. If it makes it super accessible to where everyone can do it, and this is the direction that Pokemon's going, and it mitigates hacking. Hacking will still have an advantage, but maybe less of an advantage than ever. We'll see. I still don't think hyper training is like the best solution for IVs as well, because getting a Pokemon level 100 still takes a lot of time, and if you already have like a breeding setup, you can breed those Pokemon faster. It's also gonna be like Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. It's where every Pokemon is auto leveled to 50 for any competitive setup. So that means like the level 1 Cheese Mimikyu, the level 1 Cheese Smeargle just doesn't exist anymore. So that means you're also taking even more time out of the equation, because getting a Pokemon EVs in level 50 takes quite a bit of time, so that just adds a few extra hours into getting your team set up. And when you think about any other game, it takes dozens or hundreds of hours to make it to a top competitive level. So we're gonna see. I hope it's actually like rather complex and makes you work for it, because there were some things that happened in Pokemon Sun and Moon, like we had the Pokepelago. You just drop off Pokemon and then 48 hours later you had fully EV trained Pokemon. If it's more passive and not instant, that's okay. If it takes money, if it takes other resources, if you actually have to do something to grind and earn for it, or maybe it is just less efficient. It's less efficient than breeding, but still has the accessibility for the people that want to do it. You know, if you're playing casually, and then on the side, those Pokemon are also getting stronger and ready for competitive, I guess it works out, and then we're just going to see how it plays out. But this is also something that feels like is just so weird. Like, I would have preferred it to happen in Generation 7 since hyper training was already being introduced. And then when we go back to Generation 6, I think that was the last time that people wanted to get competitive in Pokemon, because we saw that competitiveness kind of drop off in Generation 7. People, even though it was easier in Generation 7, they just didn't want to do it. Also, a lot of the hacking kind of ruined a lot of people's motivation, and they were kind of burned out from all the work they put in Generation 6. But Generation 6 felt like the big push that almost everyone in the community wanted to finally learn EV training, wanted to learn IV breeding, wanted to actually understand how competitive Pokemon works, and then get the satisfaction from being better than the average Pokemon player and just like stomping their friends or actually becoming pro, or, you know, like pro level, high tier competitive. And that was really cool to see, but then that just kind of fell apart in Generation 7. I'm wondering if this might be too little too late, because hacking is already dominated. That if it takes longer than 5 minutes to get a competitive Pokemon legitimately inside the game, people are just going to cheat anyways, because YouTubers, greedy people, and also just lazy, entitled people have promoted this to be the culture to cheat and disadvantage others inside of a children's game, which is very strange. And the sad thing is, even with all these like really cool competitive announcements that we've seen for Pokemon Sword and Shield, and Pokemon Sword and Shield just being a larger game than X and Y, with, in theory, should have a larger community than Pokemon X and Y, it doesn't really feel that way. You know, Pokemon is really getting into like online footing and all these online communities and all this information established back in Generation 6. But there was still more excitement and more hype about the competitive scene and wanting to actually battle Pokemon in Generation 6 than Generation 7, and also what looks like Generation 8. So I'm worried for that, but now we have like more systems. We have a potentially much more accessible competitive Pokemon scene to back up the greatest online hub that we have so far with Pokemon, that actually rewards you for competitive play in a meaningful way, and then also gives you a lot of other tools to work with. This is the dream competitive Pokemon setup for the game, but the interest is just super dead because everyone's entitled now, and they've kind of, like, they think that competitive Pokemon is bad and that casual is the way to go, even though when you think about Pokemon, what is Pokemon about? It's about battling other Pokemon, it's about becoming Pokemon Master, and it's being the best like no one ever was. Competitive Pokemon is the end game. Competitive Pokemon is the most core feature to Pokemon. It's not being casual, it's about actually utilizing these tools and then getting higher performance Pokemon out of it, and then becoming a Pokemon Master. But people resent that for some reason, and it just blows my mind. So, Pokemon community is more dead than ever. Stupid things are happening. I think this feature is cool, and being able to change natures is something that people have wanted for a while. Especially back, you know, it's like when you're breeding, and then you have that 50-50 roll on the Everstone, and then you get the wrong nature, but everything else is perfect. It's like you could have traded anything for that feature to get the natures, and the people were super hyped with what happened in Let's Go, but Let's Go is the best competitive Pokemon game that we've had since Generation 4, and people didn't engage with it at all. Also, when it comes to shiny hunting, if you get a shiny Pokemon, 99% of the time that Pokemon is going to be useless because it doesn't have the right nature, the right ability. Before Pokemon X and Y, you couldn't max out its IVs with hyper training or anything like that. So that's going to be a pretty cool thing. And maybe, you know, it's hard to be optimistic because the Pokemon community has let me down for the last 3 games in a row with Let's Go, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, Pokemon Sun and Moon, and just the insane amount of hacking and the insane amount of, like, complaining that we see towards competitive players. So, it's hard to be optimistic about this, especially when the games are looking very likely to be hacked as well. But maybe, you know, the game catches fire. Maybe that as people play it, it just gets more and more momentum. People finish it, they want more out of it, they go, like, super hard into competitive, and then maybe it does take this feature, which is practically cheating inside of a Pokemon game, to where it's, like, that easy to get a competitive Pokemon, and then enough people are playing it to where everyone wants to actually fight Pokemon on a heightened level again. So, we'll see where it goes. I don't like this as the direction because of how the community has been. I feel that we are in some kind of strange, backwards, upside-down world right now when it comes to how people, like, just disrespect Pokemon and don't care about reality and the facts of things. Like, Pokemon Let's Go became a shiny hunting simulator, effectively, and that's the only thing that people cared about, which is so bizarre to me. So, I guess we just have to see how it plays out, and, you know, expect the worst, hope for the best at this point. But it is going to be accessible. I can't wait to make guides on it. There's still going to be breeding. Hopefully that gives you some kind of advantage to not take away from those players. And as long as everything is rewarding like Let's Go, but still makes you work for it, I'm going to be happy. So guys, enjoy the video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.